In this video, we'll take a look at deployment of a 9821 phone to WebEx Calling using the automatic Wi-Fi provisioning in OOB. A key item using this method of deployment to speed up and make the deployment quicker is going to be the desk charger, also known as the desktop charger. An option to add to this desk charger is going to be a USB to Ethernet adapter. I'll review which specific adapter I'm using in a few moments. But what this provides is this connects to the USB port on the desk charger. The other side will provide the Ethernet RJ45 connection. And then within this deployment, the other two key items to note is we have a PC acting as a TFTP server, and that'll be hosting the WLAN XML file, which we'll cover in a few moments as far as the configuration. And then we also have the local DHCP server set up with option 160. In my example, I'm just using a Windows DHCP server. And then later we'll do some testing with the actual Wi-Fi connection to the local wireless access point. In doing testing for this type of deployment, what I've found is leveraging a donor file from the actual 9821 phone is a good pathway in using that as kind of a host or donor file as a starting point. So to achieve that, you want to generate a PRT directly from the 9821 phone. Once the PRT is generated, you want to uncompress the PRT, and then the root folder of the PRT, there'll be a cfg.xml file. I'll leave a link in the video description below regarding how to generate the PRT. It's quite simple from the phone's web interface. And then using this as a donor file, it's a good starting point to minimize any type of issues with the file. Basically, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use this as a starting point. I'm going to rename the file, I'll show that in a few moments. And then I'm going to remove anything that's not needed, and I'll show exactly which elements I use in it to achieve the onboarding via the DHCP 160. Okay, this is the 9821 phone in the desktop charger front view. This desktop charger is fairly substantial as far as when you go to pick it up, it's actually heavier than it physically seems. And then this is the back of the desktop charger. So this would be where the desk charger power adapter here on the left hand side. The USB to Ethernet adapter that I used, aka dongle, is by Ugreen, and I'll actually provide some information in a few moments. And that connects to the USB port on the back of the desktop charger. On the side here, there's actually RJ45 connection off camera. And then there is a site, I'm going to provide a link that lists the diffs that have been tested, known working. However, there's really not part numbers being listed when you go to this site. So the one I focused on was this Ugreen Type A Ethernet adapter. I did take pictures of the adapter, the box, the UPC code I'm going to share here in a few moments. So just be aware, this is just what's published as far as being tested, known working. Part numbers are not being listed. I'll share the information, the one I tested. So far I've not had any issues. I've done a good amount of testing the last few weeks. Okay, so this is a Ugreen USB to Ethernet adapter. I did order it from Amazon. I'll show us close-up of the UPC code here in a moment. So this is a close-up of the UPC code, and you should be able to leverage this information to find the actual adapter online. I will also provide a link to the Amazon page so you can order it there directly if you like. And then this is a close-up of the Ugreen USB to Ethernet adapter. The part number or model on it is CM Charlie Mary 209, so Charlie Mary 209. And this is from the actual Amazon page for this adapter. They don't actually list any part numbers on here, but I will provide the link to this in the description, and it's very affordable. This is US pricing, what I'm listing here. And then this is the document on the website regarding the onboarding XML information that is needed. Automatic Wi-Fi provisioning in OOB. So one thing I found was during testing, what they list here, and by the way, I'm just going to focus on this first part for my testing, trying to keep it very simple. So basically, I'm going to focus in on the network name, which will be the SSID. I'm going to do basic security pre-shared key. And then the other item is going to be the actual pre-share passphrase, this item right here. So those are really the three elements or variables I'm going to be modifying for deployment. What I found was following this information here, if you're using activation code, it does work just fine. I did multiple testing. However, if you're using MAC address onboarding to WebEx Calling, then this does not really onboard if you just use the XML information here. I'm going to share in a moment what I found that corrects the situation. You can use the MAC address for the onboarding versus the activation code. The other thing I want to highlight is initially I tried just copying verbatim the XML information from this web page. So starting off with this right here and then ending off right here. The phone was not liking that. So again, what I used was the donor file, XML config file from the debug level PRT, and just removed elements of XML that I did not need. And that worked beautifully. There are no issues as far as the phone was not complaining the file was corrupt, etc. So that may be a consideration. So this is the actual XML file, the WLAN profile that I used, that I'm going to show here in a few moments. So there's two groups of items I focused. The first group is the WLAN information, which is up here, specifically the SSID. I'm calling it VoIP 24. For my SSID, I'm using pre-shared key, and then I'm covering up my pre-shared passphrase for obvious reasons. So those are three elements in this first group. And the thing I was mentioning a moment ago, if you're using MAC address for the onboarding, what you're going to need to do is you're going to need to add this DHCP options to use. And if you notice, the option that is missing from here is DHCP option 160. Without doing this additional XML line here and having it kind of what I'm showing with the DHCP option 160 missing, what will happen is the phone will not actually onboard. It'll be stuck on the activation code screen and it'll just sit there. So if you want to follow the pathway I'm showing this video and use the MAC address of onboarding, then you definitely want to add this DHCP option to use as I'm illustrating here. And then that just shows on my PC that's acting as a TFTP server, I'm using TFTP D64. I have a folder in my C drive called TFTP. In the TFTP directory, I have a WLAN profile XML file. So this is what I created, but I start off from the CFG. This is from the PRT, the debug PRT I downloaded. I modified that and then labeled that as WLAN profile. That's what I showed a moment ago. And that just shows that when the phone goes to fetch the file, you will see transactions in the TFTP D64. So what you want to do is click on the log viewer tab and this will show in real time. Please be aware this server interface, this may actually jump to a loopback address like a 127. This is cosmetic. If during your usage this is just randomly jumping over to the loopback interface, this is a cosmetic defect that this software will do sometimes, so I wouldn't really worry about that. As long as you know what the interface is on your TFTP server that the phone can reach and you have this pointing to the correct directory, you should be in good shape. The only other mention I'll make is if you have Microsoft Defender or other firewall on your computer, you do have to allow the TFTP protocol through, so that's another item to look at. If you're having issues, do a Wireshark capture, and then you can understand if the actual packets are reaching the TFTP PC, and if they are reaching, then the next question is there a security firewall blocking it from the NIC up to the application layer? So Wireshark definitely would help with that. Okay, and then this is the Microsoft Windows DHCP server. So basically I went into the scope options and then I selected 160 captive portal, and then this is the actual string I'm using for the DHCP 160 option. I will create another video that actually shows how to add DHCP 160. There's some additional steps you need to do because by default it is not offered. There's a lot of documentations and other videos online that cover DHCP 160. This shouldn't be too difficult to find, but I do intend to create a dedicated video on this topic here in the near future. When you make the configurations change, you also want to restart the service here. So if this is production, you want to have a maintenance window and just kind of be aware of those items. So by the way, this was step 3. So this was step 3 in kind of our journey of the configuration workflow. Next step, we're going to go ahead and add the 9821 in WebEx Control Hub under Devices. And then we're going to do it via MAC address. And for obvious reasons, I'm blurring out my MAC address here. So this would be step number 4, and then we're going to click on Save bottom right corner. I'm going to show this in a few moments live. This is the actual phone in a cradle, so we're going to make sure the phone's in a cradle, then we're going to power it on. And then on the back side, we do have the USB to Ethernet adapter. We do want to be patient, so be aware it does take the phone some time to onboard. The time of recording this video, the phone is new, the firmware is new, and support in WebEx Calling is new. At the time you're viewing this video, there may be additional firmware updates. So what I show here as far as timing, you may notice substantially more time if there's additional firmware updates that needs to be applied. So just be patient is the key item here. Okay, we're going to go to WebEx Control Hub to the device section, and then we're going to go ahead and add a device. We're going to add a device to a user. We're going to click on Next. We're going to go ahead and type in the name of the user we're going to add the phone to. I'm going to do user 2. Select user 2. Click Next. I'm going to go into the Cisco desktop phone group. Click Next. I'm going to select the 9821 phone. I'm going to go ahead and type in the MAC address of the 9821 phone. Okay, I'm going to verify the MAC address of the 9821 phone. Okay, I see a typo. Let me correct that. And I'm just going to check one more time visually. Okay, we are good. I'm going to hit save. Okay, the phone is in the desk charger. I'm going to go ahead and power it on. On the right side of the screen, I have Wireshark running on the TFTP server. This will allow us to see when the phone goes and fetches the WLAN configuration. If you notice, the phone is getting a .90 IP address. This is via the USB to Ethernet adapter that's connected to the desktop charger. Later on, once the phone attaches to the Wi-Fi network, it will have a different IP address, so just notate that the IP address it currently is getting is via the desktop charger. This phase, we do want to be patient. The phone will need to reboot a couple times, and this will take a number of minutes for this to complete. Okay, the phone just pulled on a configuration of the WLAN from the TFTP server, and it's going to start the onboarding process here in a moment. At the time I'm recording this video, the phone is new, the firmware is new, and support in WebEx Control Hub is new for this phone. At the time in the future when you're viewing this video, there may be new firmware updates. So the time it takes you to onboard the phone to WebEx calling may be longer than what I'm showing in this video, so just note that. So we want to make sure we allow the phone to get into a stable situation where it's not applying configs or rebooting. So this will take a number of minutes. Okay, showing applying configuration. If you do run into issues, definitely leverage Wireshark, and also look at the output that the TFTP server has. I'm using TFTP D64. It's very verbose. So a combination of Wireshark and the log output of the TFTP D64 typically will give you enough information so you can head down the right direction as far as whatever issue you might be having with the phone not ingesting the XML configuration file. Is it throwing an error that you're seeing, or is the phone not able to get the TFTP server and the WLAN config file, etc., etc. So if you notice, there is a phone number the phone has. It's not finished yet with the config, so we still want to give it some time. Because of obvious reasons, I'll be blurring certain things like phone numbers in this video, but the phone does have a phone number. I just want to give a little bit more time to make sure it's completed before I do any test calls. The first test call we'll be doing is with the phone in a charger to make sure that works. Then I'm going to remove the phone from the charger, and we'll do a test call once the phone actually attaches itself to the Wi-Fi network. So we'll be doing two different tests. Okay, so you notice it wasn't complete there. It's applying another config. So we'll give it a few more moments here, and then we'll do actual test call to validate that it works in a charger and also works it removed from the charger with the wireless network.
Testing. 1, 2, 3.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and now remove it from the charger, and we'll do a test with the phone connected to the Wi-Fi network. So if we look at the top right corner, we should see a signal strength icon show up when it's doing the WLAN connection here in a few moments. Okay, there's the signal strength indicator icon that it's doing Wi-Fi connection, and then we'll do another test call here to validate it works all over Wi-Fi.
Testing. 1, 2, 3.
Okay, we're going to go ahead and take a look at the steps. So the first step we performed was creating a WLAN profile.xml file. And for that, I used the actual 9821 phone. I generated a PRT, and then I used the config XML file as my starting point for that. And basically, I removed any items I did not need from that. And then we went ahead and placed the WLAN profile into the TFTP server. I'm just using a PC for that, and then configured DHCP 160 on the DHCP Windows server. So those are our first three steps. And then we went ahead and added the 9821 phone to the WebEx control hub or collaboration control hub. And we're doing it via MAC address. We placed the 9821 phone in the desk charger. We allowed a few minutes for the 9821 phone to onboard to WebEx Calling. And then this is needed on the first time you do the first phone. However, after that point of time, steps 1, 2, and 3, we don't need to do again. So this is where we go into like the second phase now that we already have the first 3 steps completed. And from this point on, we can start off with step number 4. So the next phone we're going to be adding to WebEx Control Hub and via MAC address. And then we're going to place it into the desk charger, step 5, and step 6, we're going to allow a few minutes for it to be onboarded to WebEx Calling. So this really speeds up the workflow of adding additional phones to our environment for deployment, because now we're just having to do steps 4 and 5 and 6. So it really helps using this desk charger with the DHCP option 160. Okay, we're going to review the XML configuration file. So at the very top, I have like the first section which focuses on the wireless. So the file itself is the WLAN profile XML. I started off with a donor file from the 9821 phone, and I removed anything that was not needed. So I started with a good file the phone's not going to have issues with as far as XML. The first item is going to be the network name. That's the SSID. So that's the first item we want to do in this top section. I have right here listed VoIP24 for my SSID. And then the next items I'm going to do is pre-shared key for the security. And I'm just keeping it simple for this deployment. It does support other security, but I'm just keeping it as simple as possible. And then the next one's going to be the pre-shared key passphrase. I'm blurring it out for obvious reasons, but that was the third item I did. And then the last item was ready to address the MAC address deployment and removing DHCP option 160 from the list. So once the phone ingests this WLAN configuration, it knows it doesn't need to look at DHCP 160 any longer. And this will allow to onboard via MAC address to WebEx Calling without making this additional configuration item to the XML file. The phone will just sit on the activation code screen and won't budge. So that last item is kind of critical to allow it to onboard with a MAC address. Again, we're removing DHCP option 160 from the config the phone's going to ingest, and this will allow it on board to WebEx Control Hub via MAC address. Okay, then we're going to go ahead and wrap up by looking at the variables I used in this example. So SSID, I went ahead and using VoIP24. The next item is going to be the security mode, pre-shared key, keeping it as simple as possible for this lab exercise. And then my pre-shared key passphrase, I went ahead and blanked out what I typed in for obvious reasons. So those are 3 variables for the WLAN or Wi-Fi configuration. The last one at the bottom there is removing DHCP option 160 from the WLAN config. If we don't do this, the phone will sit on the activation code screen and will not onboard via MAC address, so that's critical. So again, removing DHCP option 160 from the config on the bottom to allow the phone to onboard via MAC address. Hopefully this video has helped with using the DHCP 160 WLAN XML configuration file, leveraging the MAC address deployment of the 9821 phone to WebEx Calling. Thank you.